All right. Well, I know you want to talk a little bit about some Democrat stuff, and State of the Union did happen. So we should give that a quick shout. I don't think we need to play any clips from it because excuse me.
I want to play one.
I'm not going to play any clips from it, but I think that the best part for me, and before we get to your clip, was that Donald Trump made a clear stance against what I think is going on in the society, which is a sort of creeping socialism. He said that we're not and never will be a socialist country. I certainly hope that's true. If the people of the country agree with him, that will be true. And if they don't, then it won't. I certainly hope that the people are in agreement when the rubber meets the road.
Well, look, he's laying the groundwork for this is, in a sense, kind of an opening salvo for the 2020 presidential campaign. Capitalism versus socialism. He didn't use the word capitalism because now it has all these negative connotations, but he certainly did use socialism, that's for sure.
Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country. We are born free, and we will stay free.
I like that part. We were born free and will stay free. I thought that was a very good turn of phrase, and this whole thing was very embarrassing to Democrats, some of whom are actual declared Democratic socialists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And Nancy Pelosi didn't know how to react, but let's not get into the whole reaction thing. Here was my favorite. That was my favorite part of it because he was laying down a marker to the American people. You need to realize that this party is going full socialist, and we're not going to let it happen. But this was the one that I really thought was delicious.
Wealthy politicians and donors push for open borders while living their lives behind walls and gates and guards. Meanwhile, working-class Americans are left to pay the price for mass illegal immigration.
So what he did was he unveiled yet another layer of Democrat hypocrisy with people like Nancy Pelosi, who have not just lived behind walls, but are protected by armed guards. Okay, so you bring the guns into it, you bring the walls into it, and he's saying, don't look at what they're saying. Don't listen to what they're saying. Look at what they do, and that'll tell you who they really are, as opposed to how they're posturing that a wall is a terrible thing, even though walls always work, because, quite simply, Donald Trump is in favor of it. It's just that simple.
Yeah, the truth is that walls do work, and you can still oppose a wall even recognizing that they work, as I do. I recognize that a wall, a well-built, constructed, designed wall system will significantly cut down on illegal immigration and the passage of contraband across the border. I grant that, and still oppose its construction. Those two things are not,
Right. You can isolate
logically inconsistent.
You isolate the subjective question of whether a wall is appropriate and the question of whether it works. And if it didn't
Pelosi
work, they wouldn't keep building them.
Honestly, because the real answer is that it is a massive source of votes for her and her party. That of all these people coming up, some infinitesimally small number of them would not vote Democrat in any election. And so it's a massive influx of Democrat votes, and that's why she supports it. It goes back, Tim, the motor voter bill, that people don't seem to talk about this. This sealed our fate. What the motor voter bill said was if you can, when you register when you get a driver's license in any state in America, they have to have an electronic process in place to let you register to vote right there, and you don't have to have a birth certificate to get a driver's license in most states. So that has led to all these problems where, the idea that, Stacey Abrams, Tim, in the Democratic rebuttal, went on and on about the problem with voter suppression in this country. And I want to say right now that voter suppression is real and affects a tiny number of people compared to the number of people who are illegal immigrants who vote in national, state, and local elections. And so I'm happy to talk with Stacey Abrams about voter suppression because it's real. But let's also not pretend that it's, that I'm not going to believe my own lying eyes that they want these people because they want voters, and that's the real reason why.
Now, the left is always claiming there's no evidence of voter fraud. The 2 people in the whole country have been convicted of it, so therefore it doesn't happen. But the real proof, Scott, comes in the places, and I don't have the number of places or the exact numbers of how many more people voted than were on the rolls. But there are documented cases, mostly in California, of where there are more people voting in a district than there are registered to vote. That's proof positive.
And in a similarly situated community, you'd have maybe, 60% participation?
Right, exactly. And you're getting 115% or 110%.
That happened in Philadelphia as well, which is
I'm shocked at that.
So that's exactly right. It's a Democrat-run city. And I can tell you that Tim, my aunt told me a story once about one of her early times in a voting booth. Now, this was probably, 60 years ago, I'm guessing, but literally a hand came in through the curtain in the booth to turn the lever and she slapped the hand away.
And then voted for the Democrat anyway.
You know what? Knowing my aunt, I don't know. At her age then, perhaps that's true. She was, I think later in life, she probably would have split the ticket. But
think, Scott, of how patronizing it is to say that there's voter suppression because they require you to have one form of ID to prove that you are who you say you are, and then it eliminates a lot of black voters. What's the implication they're making there that, black people aren't smart enough to be able to get a driver's license or a state ID? There's something incredibly patronizing about the whole basis of their voter suppression argument.
So in part, that's entirely true, and in part, you're wrong. And so I'll say this. In some places, and I think maybe Alabama, I don't want to besmirch the Alabamans, but there are some states where they actually have, if you look at where the offices where one could get such an ID used to be, like there was one in every county, for instance, and then that's a valid argument. Sure, it's an inconvenience, but given the stakes, it's an inconvenience you're just going to have to...
So in other words, when they close offices where people would ordinarily...
If you have to drive 2 hours to get to one of those places and you don't have a car, well, now you may be presenting
Does someone actually... Are there places where you have to drive 2 hours to be eligible to vote?
I can't tell you that it's 2 hours. I have looked on a map, though, commensurate with reading one of these stories and thought to myself, well... And with it going in with it with the attitude that you have of, yeah, okay, I understand it's a hardship to take off an afternoon at work, but we're talking about the vote here. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and suck it up and do it. And then when I had finished looking at that data, I thought, this place needs to open some more offices where people can get these, make it the county courthouse in every county, something like that. So you can't make that argument, and make it a free thing for people who don't already have a driver's license. What's the problem there? So it's no money. Certainly it's a little time and hassle, but that's it. And that's the price of ensuring
free and fair elections.
I mean, you're okay with like Mexicans have a far greater influence on our vote than Russians do, but we're turning the world upside down to get to the Russian influence. Meanwhile, literally, the Mexican influence of Mexican nationals in the United States has a much greater influence of the actual vote.
I will say this about Stacey Abrams. I was impressed by her oration during her Georgia gubernatorial race, which she almost won, which is very impressive for a Democrat in Georgia, which is a changing state, but it's
running
still
on
Georgia.
A hardcore gun control.
Absolutely. But
platform.
She almost won. But I will say this. I do have some sympathy for the fact that she was running against a guy who was the Secretary of State in charge of voting in the state. And that by itself is an issue.
It's gross and disgusting. He should be disallowed from entering that race or have resigned his office for doing so.
I have resigned his office, let's say 6 months at least, maybe a year before. Because you can't have the person who's in charge of voting.
Constitutionally barred from that position. Maybe forever, too. I mean, I don't know, but certainly not in the same cycle. I don't know how we got back on to future rising Democrat star Stacey Abrams, but there we go. All right, anything else, or is that it for?
I think that's all. I think that's all the fun we're allowed to have.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of The Uprising. For Tim Donner and for LibertyNation.com, this is Scott Cosenza. Bye bye.
See you next week.